In the fields during the day, the scenery and scenes are sometimes turned into beautiful poems by poets and lively paintings by painters. But at night, the poets, having drunk some wine, are a bit drunk, and the painters, holding their delicate instruments, are singing softly. None of them have time to go to the fields. So, who will tell people about the night scenery and scenes in the fields? There is someone, the Scarecrow. In Christianity, people say that humans are made by God's own hands. Whether this is true or not, we can say that scarecrows are made by farmers' own hands. Their skeletons are made of thin bamboo branches from the bamboo grove, and their muscles and skin are last year's yellow straw. Broken bamboo baskets and old lotus leaves can be used as their hats. Under the hats, their faces are flat, and you can't tell where the nose or eyes are. Their hands have no fingers, but they hold a broken fan, not really holding it, just tied to the handle with a string, hanging from the hand. Their skeletons are tall, with a part of their leg stuck into the soil in the middle of the field, so they stand there day and night. Scarecrows are very responsible. Compared to them, oxen are lazier. Sometimes they lie on the ground and lift their heads to look at the sky. Compared to them, dogs are naughtier. Sometimes they run around, making their owners search for them everywhere. Scarecrows never get bored like the oxen lying down to watch the sky. They never play around like the dogs running everywhere. They quietly watch the fields, gently waving the fan in their hands to drive away the small sparrows that come to eat the new rice grains. They don't eat or sleep, not even sitting down to rest. They always stand straight. Naturally, the scarecrows know the night scenery and scenes in the fields the best. They know how the dew falls on the grass leaves and how sweet it smells. They know how the stars twinkle and how the moon smiles. They know how peaceful the fields are at night and how the flowers, grasses, and trees sleep soundly. They know how the little insects play hide and seek and how the butterflies fall in love. In short, they know everything about the night clearly. Here are some of the things the Scarecrow encountered at night. One starry night, he was guarding the fields, gently waving the fan in his hand. The new rice spikes were close together, glistening under the starlight, as if covered with dewdrops. A slight breeze made them rustle softly. The Scarecrow watched, feeling very happy. He thought, this year's harvest would surely make his owner, a poor old woman, smile. She hadn't smiled in years. About 8 or 9 years ago, her husband died. She would cry whenever she thought about it, and her eyes were still red. She often shed tears because it became a habit. She had only one son, and they worked hard together to farm this piece of land. It took them 3 years just to pay off her husband's funeral expenses. But then her son got diphtheria and died too. She fainted and later developed a heart condition that frequently troubled her. Now she was left all alone, old, without much strength, yet still had to farm hard. It took her another 3 years to pay off her son's funeral expenses. But then for the next 2 years, the fields were flooded, and the rice either rotted or sprouted. She cried even more, her eyes got worse, and she could hardly see anything far away. Her face was full of wrinkles, looking like a dried orange, and she hadn't smiled in years. But this year, the rice was growing well, strong, and the rainfall wasn't too much, indicating a good harvest. So the Scarecrow was happy for her. He thought that on the harvest day, when she saw the big, plump rice spikes, she would finally smile, feeling that her hard work hadn't been in vain. If she did smile, the Scarecrow thought it would be more beautiful and precious than the stars and the moon because he loved his owner. While the Scarecrow was thinking, a small moth flew by. It was a grey-brown moth, and he immediately recognized it as the enemy of the rice and, therefore, the enemy of his owner. He had to chase the moth away because of his duty and his love for his owner. So he waved his fan, but the breeze from the fan wasn't strong enough to scare the moth. The moth flew around for a while and then landed on a rice leaf, seemingly oblivious to the Scarecrow's attempts to drive it away. The Scarecrow grew very anxious but was stuck in the ground like a tree, unable to move even a step forward. Despite waving his fan vigorously, the moth remained still. He thought about the future of the field, his owner's tears and wrinkled face, and her fate, and his heart ached as if cut by a knife. But the moth was determined to stay, no matter how much he tried to chase it away. The stars faded, and all the night scenes disappeared when the moth finally flew away. The Scarecrow carefully examined the rice leaf and saw that the tip was curling, with several eggs left by the moth. This filled him with immense terror, thinking that disaster had truly come and that avoiding it was impossible. His poor owner only had a pair of blurry eyes. He had to warn her to see the moth eggs early and save the crops. Thinking this, he waved his fan more diligently. The fan often hit his body, making a clapping sound. He couldn't shout, so this was the only way to warn his owner. The old woman came to the field. She bent down to check the water level, which was just right and didn't need to be refilled from the river. She looked at the rice she had planted, all very strong. She felt the rice spikes, which were heavy. She then looked at the Scarecrow, whose head was still on straight, fan still in hand, waving and making a clapping sound, and he was still standing tall and firm, in the same position as before. Seeing everything was fine, she walked up the field bank, ready to go home to make grass ropes. The Scarecrow saw his owner leaving and became very anxious, shaking his fan to create a hurried sound to keep her there. The sound seemed to say, "My owner, don't go. Don't think everything in the field is fine, a huge disaster is already taking root here. Once it erupts, it will be uncontrollable, and then you will cry until you run out of tears and break your heart. It's still not too late to stop it now. Here, on this very plant, look at the tip of the leaf." He repeatedly warned her with the sound of the fan, but the old woman didn't understand and walked away step by step. He was desperate, frantically shaking the fan until her silhouette disappeared. He then realized his warning had been in vain. Other than the Scarecrow, no one worried about the rice. He wished he could leap over and eliminate the source of the disaster. He wished the wind could carry a message to his owner to come quickly and remove the danger. His body was already weak, and with his worries, he became even more haggard, unable to stand upright, leaning over like a sick person. Within a few days, the eggs laid by the moth turned into larvae, which were everywhere in the rice field. Late at night, the Scarecrow could hear them gnawing on the rice leaves and see their ever-greedy faces. Gradually, all the lush green rice disappeared, leaving only bare stalks. He was heartbroken and couldn't bear to look, thinking of his owner's hard work resulting in only tears and sighs, and he couldn't help but bow his head and cry. It was getting very cold, and in the night fields, the cold wind made the Scarecrow shiver, but he didn't notice because he was crying. Suddenly, he heard a woman's voice. "I thought it was someone else, but it turns out to be you." He was startled, realizing how cold he was. But what could he do? Bound by his duty and unable to move, he had to stand there, even in the cold. He saw the woman was a fisherwoman. The field bordered a river where her boat was docked, with a faint light coming from the cabin. She was lowering a fishing net into the river and then sat on the bank, waiting to pull it up later. From the cabin, he could hear a child coughing and weakly calling for a mom. This made the fisherwoman anxious. She struggled with the net, often coming up empty. The child kept coughing and calling, and she said, "Just sleep for now. When I catch some fish, I'll make you porridge tomorrow. You're making me so anxious I can't catch any fish." The child couldn't help but cry out, "Mom, I'm so thirsty. Can I have some tea?" followed by more coughing. "Where would I get tea? Just be quiet for a while, please, my dear. I'm dying of thirst." The child started crying loudly, sounding particularly pitiful in the empty night field. The fisherwoman, helpless, put down the net rope, went to the boat, fetched a bowl, scooped some water from the river, and gave it to the child to drink. The child drank it all at once, being extremely thirsty. But as soon as the bowl was set down, the child started coughing again, even more severely, until only gasping was left. The fisherwoman couldn't tend to the child any longer, so she returned to the bank to pull her net. After a long time, with no sound from the cabin, she finally caught a fish, about 7 or 8 inches long. This was her first catch, and she carefully placed the fish in a wooden bucket and put the net back in the river. The bucket was next to the Scarecrow's feet. The Scarecrow felt even sadder now. He pitied the sick child, so thirsty yet unable to get a proper drink, so sick yet unable to sleep with the mother. He also pitied the fisherwoman, who had to think about tomorrow's porridge on this cold night, leaving her sick child alone. He wished he could become firewood to boil tea for the child, wished he could become a quilt to give the child warmth, wished he could grab the worm spoils to make porridge for the fisherwoman. If he could move, he would have done all these things immediately. But unfortunately, his body was stuck in the ground like a tree, unable to move even a step. He had no choice, becoming more heartbroken the more he thought about it, and cried even harder. Suddenly, he heard a splash and stopped crying, realizing it was the fish being thrown into the bucket. There was very little water in the bucket, and the fish lay at the bottom, only getting a bit of moisture on one side. The fish was struggling, trying to jump out, but every jump was blocked by the high sides of the bucket, causing it to fall painfully back to the bottom. The fish, looking up at the Scarecrow, pleaded, "My friend, please put down your fan and save me. If I leave my watery home, I will surely die. Please, my kind friend, save me." Hearing the fish's earnest plea, the Scarecrow felt deeply saddened, but he could only shake his head vigorously. He meant to say, "Please forgive me, I am a weak and helpless person. My heart not only wants to save you but also wants to save the fisherwoman and her child, and all the suffering. But I am fixed in the soil like a tree, unable to move freely even half a step. How can I act on my wishes? Please forgive me, I am a weak and helpless person." The fish didn't understand the Scarecrow's meaning, only seeing him shake his head repeatedly, and grew angry. "How is this difficult? You have no heart, just shaking your head. I was wrong to seek help from others for my difficulties. I should try myself, if not, death is nothing." The fish shouted and jumped with all its might, even lifting its tail and pectoral fins. The Scarecrow saw the fish misunderstood him, and without a way to explain, he felt very sad, sighing and crying. After a while, he looked up and saw the fisherwoman asleep, still holding the net rope. She was too tired and finally couldn't stay awake. What about the fish in the bucket? The jumping sound had stopped, its tail still twitching occasionally. The Scarecrow thought it was a night full of sorrowful events, a truly sad night. But those little thieves eating the rice leaves were happy, dancing on the bare stalks. Their harvest was ruined, his owner's hard work wasted. Could there be anything more pitiful? The night grew darker, even the stars lost their light. The Scarecrow suddenly saw a black figure walking along the bank, getting closer, and realized it was a woman in a loose short jacket, her hair messy. She stood and looked at the fishing boat on the riverbank, then turned and walked towards the river, standing straight again after a few steps. The Scarecrow found it strange and watched her closely. A very sad voice came from her mouth, weak and broken. Only the Scarecrow, used to all the night sounds, could hear it. The voice said, "I'm not a cow or a pig to be sold at will. I must run, I can't wait to be sold tomorrow. Even if you get some money, you'll just gamble or drink it away, what's the use? Why do you push me so? Only death can free me. I'll find my child in the afterlife." These words were not coherent, mixed with sobs and broken by her crying. The Scarecrow was very frightened, encountering yet another tragic situation. She wanted to die. He was anxious to save her, not knowing why. He waved his fan to wake the sleeping fisherwoman, but it was useless. The fisherwoman slept like the dead, motionless. He hated himself for being fixed in the soil like a tree, unable to move even half a step. Wasn't it a sin to watch someone die without helping? He felt it was a pain worse than death. Oh heavens, let it be day soon. Let the farmers wake up. Let the birds fly to give the alarm. Let the wind blow away her thoughts of death. He prayed silently, but it was still dark, with no sound. His heart broke, afraid to watch but unable to look away. He stared fearfully at the black figure by the river. The woman stood silently for a while, then leaned forward. The Scarecrow knew the dreadful moment had come, waving his fan more urgently. But she didn't jump, still standing straight. After a long time, she suddenly raised her arms and threw herself into the river. The Scarecrow, seeing this, fainted before hearing her hit the water. The next morning, a farmer passing by the river found a dead body and the news spread quickly. Men and women nearby ran to see. The noise woke the sleeping fisherwoman, who found the fish in the bucket had died. She took the bucket back to the cabin. The sick child woke up, looking even thinner and coughing more severely. The old woman also came to the river with the crowd, passing her field. She glanced at it. She hadn't expected that in just a few days, it was over. The leaves and spikes were gone, only bare stalks left. She was so distressed that she stamped her feet, beat her chest, and cried out loud. The crowd came to comfort her, seeing the Scarecrow fallen in the field.